Well, I grew up in a town called Cowdenbeath, Cowdenbeath, which was a mining community. But I had very little education. I left school when I was 14. My brother bought me a saxophone, an alto saxophone, when I was 14. And I had 2 or 3 lessons. And 6 months later I was playing in local dance bands. And I could play better than the teacher that was giving me lessons, so I stopped having lessons. So my education has just been a gradual thing from that time on. I do a lot of reading, and I read a lot of history, and I read a lot of books, and I read a lot of books on music, and I study music, but mostly it's been by myself. And I played in a lot of bands. I've been in the, I was figuring out, I came to the United States. Next year it'll be 50 years that I've been in the United States. I lived in Scotland until I was 17. And then I did an audition. I was working in Glasgow, which is the main industrial town in Scotland. And I did an audition for this band that came up from London and did like a 3-week season in Glasgow. They needed a tenor saxophone player. I did an audition, and that was my passage to London. I went to London with that band. He was a band leader. His name was Tommy Sampson. He was Scots. Most of the band were from Scotland, but most of the band gravitated to Ted Heath's band eventually. And then I was in London, and I worked in several bands in London. I worked with Tommy Sampson. Then I worked with a sextet with a man called Harry Parry, who was a clarinet player. And I went from there to Joe Loss, who was probably the premier dance band in the United Kingdom at that time. Excuse me. And from there, I went to Jack Parnell. And Jack Parnell was the drummer with Ted Heath for a number of years. He left and formed his own band. And I was in the band. And I worked with Jack Parnell for 2 years. And then I left and went with a man called Humphrey Littleton. And Humphrey was a jazz trumpet player, educated at Eton College in London. His father was a housemaster of Eton College, and Humphrey was educated there. He was in the Coldstream Guards during the war, played the trumpet. He said he landed on Anzac Beach with a rifle and a trumpet. So from there, I worked with Humphrey for about 8 or 9 years, and then I came to the United States. And I was in New York, and I had to wait 6 months before I could join the union, because at that time the musicians union was very strong in New York, and I had to wait 6 months to join the union. And after 6 months, I was out on the road with Woody Herman's band, and Woody Herman was famous big band leader. And my career has gone on from there. I went from Woody Herman, came back to New York, and started freelancing, and I worked as a freelance in New York for a number of years. And during that time, I worked with the Duke Ellington Band, and I did a Broadway show called Sophisticated Ladies. And after that, I came to Jazz at Lincoln Center. And I've been with Wynton Marsalis for the last 26 and a half years, since 1980, I think, since about 1987. I've been working with the Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra, and I'm still there. I'm sort of semi-retired now. I don't do any more touring and traveling because I'm 85 years old, and it's getting a bit much to be doing one-night stands and things like that, so I don't do that anymore. I just work with a band in New York, and I teach at Juilliard, and I teach at Manhattan School of Music, and I also teach at Jazz at Lincoln Center, which is pretty good for somebody with no education to speak of.